Do you want to start?
Doesn't matter. What am I going to do?
We're each going to tell about our childhood, and then we'll tell about our life together.
Okay. Well, I'm.
You should also start out with
I was just going to do that.
when you were born, when and where you
Yeah. I'm Faris McMullin, Faris Walker McMullin. I was born on June 19, 1946, in Pocatello, Idaho, when my dad was a pharmacy student at Idaho State University. It's kind of an interesting thing that when I was born, when after World War II, which we call the war, um, my dad wanted to go to pharmacy school, and he didn't have any money, so he talked to my Grandpa Walker, and Grandpa Walker agreed to help him with tuition and things like that, and so they moved to Pocatello, and when he got there to the university, they had there was an old building, and it had been a dormitory years before, but it was kind of run down and needed paint and some work. So he went to the school and said, "Hey, if I fix up this dormitory, will you allow me and my wife to stay there?" And they said, "We'll not allow you to stay there, but we'll pay you a stipend to have you manage it." And so he did. He fixed it all up, and they filled it up after, at that time there's lots of people going to school after the war, got out of the military. And he fixed it all up, and they moved in there, and in 1946 I was born, which is about a year later I was born there. And the name of the building was Faris Hall. So they named me after the boys' dormitory. So I'm the only person I know of in the world who is named after a boys' dormitory. That's my whole total claim to fame. We lived there for a short time while he finished school. We moved to Roy, Utah in 1949 after my sister Nola Kay was born. And my dad started the first pharmacies in Roy, Utah. Back then there was about 900 people lived there, and he started the first pharmacy there. And we rented houses, and the house that I remember was on a farm just outside of town, and it was a produce farm. They raised cucumbers and tomatoes. And my mom used to pick asparagus off the ditch in the back of the field. And there was wild asparagus was growing back there, so she'd go back there and pick asparagus. We had it was a small home. I remember sleeping in a bunk bed, if you want to call it that. They were handmade. And anyway, I don't remember an awful lot about that, about being there. I remember a few things, though. I remember that I was constantly being stung by wasps. It was really, I don't know why, but they didn't seem to bother the rest of the family, but they sure liked me. It's probably because where I was always digging around looking at stuff and probably disturbing their nests. That's probably why I got stung. And anyway, one time I remember I had a wasp land on my shoulder, and he just sat there for the longest time. So I went and told my siblings. I told Brad and Spencer, who are my older siblings. I told them that this was my friend and that he was there to protect me from the other wasps. And so I guess I had a vivid imagination there too. But I took my little sister, who who's 2 years younger than me, so I must have been about, 4, or maybe even closer to 5, 4 o'clock, 4 years old then. And we would take the little red wagon, we'd walk out into the tomatoes and the cucumbers, and we'd pick a bunch of that stuff. We had permission from the farmer to do that. We'd pick a bunch of tomatoes and cucumbers, then we'd go sit on the lawn and we'd eat them. And we just had a great time doing that. And another thing we had a great time doing is we had a ditch, irrigation ditch ran through the front of the yard. And we would go walk along that ditch and we'd find garter snakes and we'd catch them. Then we'd take them over on the lawn and play with them. And the most interesting thing of all that, one time, one of the snakes climbed up into somebody's clothing. I don't remember who it was, because it'd be me and my brother Brad and my brother Spencer, who were both older than me, and my sister Nola Kay, 2 years younger, and climbed up in somebody's clothing, and we never did see it come out, and we never did find it. So maybe they're still walking around with a snake somewhere in their clothing. So that's my dad was busy all the time, and he had bought a lot that was part of an apricot orchard. And when he wasn't working at the store, he was common for him to be up working on the house, because he was going to build that house himself. My dad had built a house for my mom for when they got married, so they'd have their own home. And it was a little 2-bedroom home, and so they sold that to my grandparents, to my grandpa and grandma McMullin, when they went off to school. And my grandpa and grandma lived there throughout their entire rest of their lives in that little 2-bedroom house. So it was, it disappeared when I went back sometime later. We went back after we were married. After they'd married and Grandma Mullen had died, they had somebody had torn it down. So.
Tell about the bookcase.
Well, my dad built a bookcase when we were down in Roy, and we have that bookcase today that's just here in the other room. It's a small bookcase, but it's something to remind us of our dad and some of the things he did. So my dad died in 1951, and we moved, and Grandpa Walker came down and just kind of took over, which is typically how he did things. And he liquidated out the pharmacy and packed us all up and took us all up to Raymond, Alberta, Canada, when I was 5 years old. And my dad died on October 4th, 1951. And we went back up to Canada, and we lived, as a matter of fact, my entire life until I went to college was spent living in their home in Raymond. And
Tell what your dad died of.
my dad died of sarcoma, cancer. When we got to Raymond, I mean, it was a big yard. To me, it was a very big house. Really wasn't all that big, but it was a huge house to me. And I grew up and I enjoyed being outside and running around, and I enjoyed being with my Grandpa Walker. He was a farmer, a rancher, and I loved to go with him up to what's called the Ridge. The Ridge is a moraine that was dropped there by the Ice Age. And it's a moraine that's about 1,000 feet or more higher than the plains area where Raymond is located. Raymond is located about, well, it's 50 miles from the border crossing, so it's probably about 30 miles as the crow flies from the U.S. border going north. And it's a small community. It's still a fairly small community. It was about 2,000 people when all the time I lived there. And it's interesting because it's a small community. When I was there were 4 wards in the church there. Were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. There were 4 wards in 2 buildings. And the town remains kind of unique. It's an interesting community to me as I've thought about it and studied it. To this date, there's no alcohol sold within the city limits of that community. And the roads are clean and neat. A lot of them are paved. There's no garbage anywhere. It's just it's a real interesting experiment there to have. Raymond is. My grandpa Walker was really proud of it. I remember going up the ridge once with him. They used to have 3,000 sheep in addition to cattle. And the 3,000 sheep in the spring, they all had to be sheared. And they would bring in professional shearers to shear all these sheep. And so there's all these, you're already, the ewes were already lambed out, I think, by then. And this one ewe had lost her lamb. And everybody was looking for it. And I'm just a little shaver. I don't know how old I was. My grandpa died when I was 8, so I was certainly considerably younger than that at the time. But they couldn't find this lamb. And I climbed out of the corral, and I walked straight across the prairie. This is a big flat area up in the ridge country. I walked straight across the prairie and reached down into a badger hole and pulled this lamb out. And they couldn't believe it. I'd found this lamb. I carried it back and said, "Here's the lamb." That was really, to me, I just look at it as a great example of how the Holy Ghost can even work in a little boy. I also had the same experience in there. I was in there and there was a ewe that wanted to butt me. And I said, "Grandpa, what do I do? That ewe wants me to butt me." And he says, "Well, you ought to get a 2x4 and you can just beat her with that." So I went and found a 2x4 and I chased that ewe. Anyway, they finally took the 2x4 away from me. But I loved it up there. I love it up there to this day. It's just an amazing place. We used to go play in this coulee. We called it Devil's Coulee because it runs along parallel at the edge of the property. This is several sections of land. The section 640 acres, and this is several sections of land. But this one area, we had this place called Devil's Coulee. We would climb down inside of there, and we would hunt for fossils and stuff like that. And we found quite a few fossils. A lot of fossils and interesting stuff, and I was always looking for gold. I didn't find any gold. But anyway, it's interesting that later on they had some paleontologists or something in there from the province, and they found T-Rex eggs. And they found that one of the T-Rex eggs was so well preserved it still had a T-Rex embryo or fetus, whatever you'd call it, in the egg. So the province of Alberta, by eminent domain, took that property and they built a fence around it. And today, nobody can get in there nowadays because they still have that as a dig, I guess, for fossils and things. Another thing we did up there on the ridge is when we were younger, when I was younger, I remember we would go up there, the whole Walker family would go up there, and Grandpa and Grandma and my mom and all her siblings that were in town. There were several. And we would go up the ridge and we would pick wash tubs full of service berries and also wash tubs full of choke cherries, because there were so many growing in the sides of the coulees. And that was a lot of fun, and I ate a lot more than I'm sure that I put into the bucket. And it was good. I have such great memories of being on the ridge. A few years back, we were up there, and I went down. I knew where somebody told me where to go, and I went and climbed down in there. There's actually veins of coal down in the sides of the coulees. The coulee is just like a valley here, but they come off of there's several coulees up on the ridge, and the cattle get down there. They get down there in the wintertime and get away from the snow. It's not a very hospitable place in the wintertime up there, but cattle seem to do pretty well up there in the wintertime. Anyway, so when I was a little boy, I used to love everything to do with guns and fishing. And my family had nothing to do with guns, but fishing was okay. But I had a couple of interesting things. My Grandpa Walker had passed away by now, and he left his fly rod. And I rigged up his fly rod one day and said, I've got to go see how this fly rod works. So I went around and I caught a bunch of flies. And I took the fly rod and put a regular bait hook on the end of it, went out to the little pond out about 1.5 miles from where we lived, and I put one of these flies, hooked it with a hook, and I tried to figure out how to cast it. Anyway, I get it out there a little way in there, but I never did get a fish to come bite that hook. They just didn't seem. I said, well, what good's a fly rod if they won't even bite it? So anyway, that's the last time I went fly fishing. And but another time, there was a reservoir about 7 miles from town. We used to call it Lunds. And we'd walk, and I hiked out there. And I hiked out there, and I stopped at Kinsey's, which was the pond where I fished all the time. And I caught a bunch of little skipjack. We call them skipjacks. And they're just little fish about, 4 to 6 inches long. And I caught several of those, and then I had them in a bucket. Then I hiked all the rest of the way out to Lunds Reservoir. And there were some people out there. I remember Harry Fairbanks was one of them fishing. He was the guy that maintained the chapel, the chapel, which was a block from where I lived. And so I went out there, and he was there, and there was somebody else out there. But anyway, I had my own float. I carved it out of a piece of wood. I didn't have money to buy a float. But I hooked up my hook, and I hooked a skipjack on it, and I threw it way out there. And it wasn't out there, but for a very short time, and bam. I wheeled it in and had this really nice pike about like this. And got him off the hook and got him stuck in somehow I had him captured. And then I put on another skipjack, and it wasn't very much later than that, I had another one. And we reeled it in with my little cheap $5 fishing rod and reel, and got it in, and had these 2 fish. And it was, I was pretty proud of myself. And Harry Fairbanks, they said, well, what are you fishing with? And I just said, skipjacks. Anyway, they were really excited about this. But anyway, so Harry Fairbanks said, well, I'm about ready to go back to town. Would you like a ride back? So he put me in his truck, and we drove back to town, and I took my fish home. And we cleaned them all up, and I don't know if we ate them for one meal or 2 meals, but anyway, we ate them. So that's my favorite fishing time as a little boy.
Tell about your first gun that you ordered through the mail.
Oh, yeah. I had this thing, I always loved guns. And my family my grandmother hated them, and my mom didn't like them much. But anyway, somehow I got $9 put together, and I found this thing in this book somewhere, an ad, and so I took their coupon or whatever it was, and they were selling these rifles for $9. So I sent $9 with this envelope in an envelope to this company and bought this gun. And so they sent it to me, and I got this box delivered to the house. And I opened it up, and here's this gun, and it's a 1903 A3 308 British. It was the standard weapon used by the British and by the Canadian armies in World War I and the beginning of World War II. And I was all covered in cosmoline, had a stock, went all the way had a Mannlicher stock on it, went all the way to the forward of it. So I took that weapon and I cut off the stock out of saw, and I cut the stock off so it was more of a rifle length rather than being a great big heavier thing, trying to get the weight down, and cut it off. And then I took a glass jar, and I broke the glass jar. If you break a piece of glass like that, all the edges are just razor sharp. And I used it, and I scraped the wood, and I scraped and scraped and scraped that wood down till I got all of it shaped the way I wanted it and got the size down so the rifle wasn't so heavy. And then I sanded it all, and then I got some linseed oil, and I rubbed linseed oil into all of it to make it waterproof. And a couple of years later, I was 16. Anyway, I had the rifle, and it was not real expensive to buy ammunition for. It was dirt cheap military surplus ammo. And we could buy it even buy tracers. I don't know if you know what a tracer is. When the round goes off, it comes out of the barrel, and it burns. It's burning in the back of it, so you can see exactly where the round's going, where the bullet's going. And I had some friends. We used to go out and head into a hillside where we were comfortable, where we were shooting into. We'd shoot those tracers and watch them go over an arc. We'd only go out at night and shoot, and you see this tracer arc over the air and arc and down into this hillside. And there wasn't any grass there, so actually it was a dam, is what it was. It wasn't a hillside, it was a dam. But anyway, when I was 16, David Salmon and I went up to the ridge, and I knew the ridge pretty well. I went and sat myself down, and he sat himself down in another place, and sure enough, I had a license, and here comes the buck deer over the hill, and I shot him with my own sporterized 303 British. And it was with Finnish military. The Finnish were interesting. In World War II, they had this convention that it was illegal to shoot anything but solid bullets, so they wouldn't expand, so you wouldn't hurt people as bad. You just injured them. That's really a joke to me. But Finnish said, we're not doing that. So they had soft-nosed bullets. So the soft-nosed 303 British bullets I was able to buy, so that's what I used to hunt with. So I went through high school there in Raymond. When I was in 9th grade, I entered into a track meet to run the 800-meter race. And I used to run my paper route every night, and it was about 3 miles long by the time you ran up and down the streets. And you only had 20 papers, but it took a long time to do that. Anyway, so I was in really good shape, and I got in this race, and it was sponsored by the school, and I guess it was a track meet for some visiting people as well from different towns. And I ran this 800-meter race, and I beat everybody in the race, all the seniors and juniors and sophomores. I was a freshman, and I won this race quite handily, probably by 100 feet or so. So that was my one accomplishment in high school. I won table tennis tournament for the high school, and when I won the final match of it, the only thing anybody ever said to me was, "It's a good thing you didn't have to play Keith Gibb, or he'll beat you." That's the only thing anybody ever said to me. So I used to love to play hockey, and in the wintertime, they just had a rink in town there with a pot-bellied stove in it, with a shack with a pot-bellied stove, and I would go down there whenever I could, and I'd play hockey. I loved to play hockey, and just played with all the guys, and I think we traveled 2 places once to play other teams. Other than that, it was just mainly for fun, and I truly enjoyed that. I graduated in 1964, and I was accepted to BYU. I sent in my acceptance after I'd filed for admission, and I got a response back accepting me. I filled out my acceptance and sent it back to BYU, and they sent me this acceptance letter back, and they spelled my name Paris on my acceptance letter, and they assigned me to live in one of the girls' dormitories. So I had to write them back and say, "We got a problem here." Anyway, I ended up going to Hinckley Hall. So,
One more story you told me. Tell about Uncle Bob.
about Uncle Bob. Oh, Uncle Bob, when he graduated from medical school, he came back and finished his residency in surgery. He moved to Calgary and set up his practice in Calgary. And he met, anyway, he would come down regularly to Raymond to visit his mom and dad, and just to visit the family, because most of his siblings lived there. And we'd go to church on Sunday, and after church, he'd load us all in his car, and he'd take us over to the Utah Cafe. And we could each buy a candy bar. He'd buy us all a candy bar. And then we'd get in his car, and he always had a convertible. And we'd drive, and he'd go for a drive out in the country for a little ways, and drive around while we ate our candy bars, and then we'd go back to town. I did take Uncle Bob hunting pheasants once, and he was able to shoot one pheasant. But the problem was he shot a hen pheasant, and they're illegal to shoot. But we took it home and cleaned it up anyway. So, yeah, I think that's about it. I loved my Grandpa Walker. He was a great guy. And my Grandma Walker was great to tolerate me. She used to, if she ever got really frustrated with me, she'd say, "Faris, I want you to go out and cut me a willow." And I would go out in the yard and find this long branch or something on an apple tree or something. We had some crab apple trees, and cut something about 3 feet long and take it into her, and then she'd give me a swat or 2 or 3 so I had to provide her with the willow so she could give me a licking. So, but anyway, I remember my Grandma Walker as being someone who loved me and loved my family, and tolerated us, and She lived till she was 86 years old. Grandpa Walker died when he was 69. She lived to be about 86 years old and died in 1969. But she was a wonderful person. I love my mom. My mom is a tremendous influence in my life as someone who loved her Father in heaven, loved God, and I only got to go. We never got to go in any vacations, but we did get up. My grandparents on the McMullin's side got to be the managers of a campground up there, and they had a little shed there, a little house that they used to live. They could stay in while they were there, and we go up and stay for a few days. And my mom took us all on a hike up to Bertha Lake. And we got up to Bertha Lake, and it was about a 5-mile hike. And we slid down some of the snowbanks that were still there. And that's the only time I ever got to spend any time with my mom in just doing fun things. And I've always remembered that and thought, wow, my mom worked so hard. When she wasn't working, she was working on the house and cleaning and mending, and I won't say mending. I don't know my mom ever mended anything.
She mended socks.
She mended socks with yarn. something you'd crochet up something with. Anyway, she didn't crochet either. When my dad died, my mom had not had any formal education other than high school. And I'm going to tell a very brief story about my mom. When my mom was young, the church used to raise money by having this thing. They'd have auctions, and they'd actually have little things where you go there, and there's all kinds of things you could go do, and you paid money to do them, and you got awards if you did it. But they had this auction for a car. And my grandpa was...
It was a lottery, wasn't it? Not really an auction.
it was not an auction. It was a lottery. Thanks.
A raffle. It was a raffle.
It was a
That's
raffle.
what
You
it's
had to
called.
buy a raffle ticket. My mom bought a raffle ticket for it, and my grandpa was either the bishop or the stake president. We had been the bishop then. And my mom won the car. And she was so excited to win this car. And Grandpa Walker decided for her that she would donate it back to the church so they could sell it and get the money, get some more money. So that's what they did. And by doing that, they were able to build the chapel for the chapel that was the chapel I attended all my growing up years. The third ward chapel, second and third ward chapel. So, which ultimately got turned into the town hall. So, I think that's good.
Just one more story.
Okay.
Tell the story about President Kimball.
Oh.
That's a good one for posterity to know.
Yeah, Grandpa was stake president when we went to live with him. And he was the stake president till he died. But that was just 3 years later. But so general authority, we always had general authorities for a conference. And quite often it was an apostle. And President Kimball, who was an apostle at that time, came to our house and stayed with us that night. And then we went to conference in the morning, and then we had dinner at the house after conference. Then we had an afternoon session too. So we'd have that morning session, and so anyway, we had dinner, and we had just a regular farm food, potatoes and gravy and meat and vegetables and bread and a dessert of some kind. And I have a brother named Spencer. My oldest brother is named Bradford. my next oldest brother is named Spencer. Both of them have passed away at this point in my life now. Anyway, Spencer, President Kimball, whose name is Spencer W. Kimball, he looked at Spencer and he took out of his pocket a silver dollar and he said, "Spencer, anytime I meet a little boy named Spencer, I give him a silver dollar." So he handed that silver dollar to Spencer. Spencer was pretty excited. And I looked at that and said, "Well, President Kimball, what do you do when you meet a little boy named Faris?" And everybody just laughed, and there was nothing else happened. Anyway, at the end of that day, President Kimball, Elder Kimball, was going to Lethbridge to some meetings. In Lethbridge was some church authorities there, probably a stake president there in Lethbridge. And he got in his car and they drove out to Welling, which is 5 miles, and there's a turn, there's a T there. And you go right, you go to Lethbridge, you go left, you go to Waterton Park or McGrath. So anyway, he was driving out there, had somebody driving him. They got out to Welling, out to that Welling turnoff, and President Kimball said, "I will need you to turn around and go back." And so they did. They turned around and drove back to Raymond. And they came and found me. He came to the house, and I was there. And he came up to me, and he gave me a paper dollar. It wasn't a silver dollar, but he gave me $1, and told me that he gave a little boy named Faris $1. And that always impressed me. We got to know him a little bit when he was later on in Salt Lake. But anyway, very, very fine man. One thing I didn't say about my dad. I want to say a couple of things about my dad. One, my dad really loved my mom. And I think maybe that's what I remember most about him, is how much he loved my mom. But I walked out into the yard one day, and with my right foot, I stepped on a milk cap. Now the milk caps back then on the bottles were like pop bottle caps. They were that hard, and you had to open them the same way I stepped on one, and it actually dug into my foot. And it actually, I guess I was screaming. My dad came out, or else my mom called him, or I don't know. Anyway, he came out and picked me up, and I had this piece of my foot was actually out of my foot. And he took me in the house, and he put it in, cleaned it up, put some iodine on it probably, and put it back in, and then wrapped it all up and kept it wrapped up, and it healed up. And so that's just an interesting thing to me, that I still now and then look at the scar that I have on the bottom of my foot from my dad doing that. My dad had an special ability for music. He could pick up any instrument and just play it. And he had a band, and that band, they call a band, they call it an orchestra. I guess it was an orchestra. And he typically played the clarinet, but sometimes the saxophone. But this band, they played for all kinds of musical things in town, and for the dances and things like that they had, which were numerous at that time. So he had very, very great spirit, very, very great talent for that. Years later, Pat was with me, and we interviewed my Uncle Ralph. And after we finished the interview, I turned to my Uncle Ralph and I said, "Uncle Ralph, what do you think of my dad?" And Um, my Uncle Ralph thought about it for a minute, and he said he was the kindest, most unselfish man I ever met. And I think, I don't know anything that could be said greater about a person, but to be the kindest, most generous person, unselfish person a person ever met. I honor him for that, and I would hope that I can accede to that someday. Right?
Yep. You do.
Okay. Thank you. I think it's now Pat's turn to talk. I've talked myself in a hole.
Do you, I don't recall, do you have any siblings, and or did you want to talk about them as well? Just like a brief, I have this many
Okay.
siblings.
Sure. My dad during World War II was actually asked. My grandpa Walker, my grandpa McMullin was a machinist, and they had moved to Raymond from Burley, Idaho, where my dad was born. My dad was born in Burley when my grandpa was a machinist there. But when the sugar factory was built in Raymond, my grandpa McMullin took his family and they moved up to Raymond. He became a machinist for the sugar factory. My dad also learned those type of skills as well as welding. And he was a very exceptional welder. So the government was looking for welders that could go to Vancouver and train welders to work in the shipyard. And somehow my dad ended up being, I guess, drafted to do that. So he took his wife and they were shortly married, took his wife and they moved to Vancouver, BC, where for the duration of the war, almost for the duration of the war, he trained welders in the shipyards for how to weld, to build ships, and to maintain ships. And then while they were there, Bradford was born. He's my eldest brother, and he was born in 1943, and in January of 1943, and he died last year in April at the age of 80. My second oldest brother is named Spencer, and he was born right after they moved back from Vancouver in Lethbridge. He was born in Lethbridge. Why in Lethbridge rather than Raymond, I don't know, but he was born in Lethbridge, and he was a musical talent. He could sit down at the piano and just play it. Didn't have to have music or anything else. He could sit down and play it. And he died at the age of 62, which would have made him died in 1996 or 2006 or anyway. He died at the age of 62. And then I was born when when Mom and Dad went to Idaho State for me to go to pharmacy school, and then my sister was also born there. Her name is Nola Kay, and she was born in 1949. And they went to Roy, and Roy, my youngest brother Ron, was born he was born in Ogden in 1951. So I think he was born in 51. No, he would have been born in 50, because he was a year old when my dad died.
Yeah.
My dad died in October 4th in 1951. Ron was born in August of 50. So Nola Kay was born in October of
48, I think,
48.
because she was 2 years younger
Yeah,
than
48. And Spencer was born in July of 43, 44, of 44. And Brad was born in January of 43. So my sister lives, married George Baker, and they live now in Hurricane, Utah, down by St. George. And my brother Ron married Mary Rose Hudson, and they live in Raymond, Alberta still. So he was an agronomist. He was an agronomic scientist for his career, and then had an interesting career doing that. So, how's that?
Yeah.
Pete?
Well, my name is Patricia Jean. My maiden name was Allred. I was born on November 16th, 1946. My mother tells me that because she was laboring all night long, she read the book Jane Eyre all night long while she was in labor with me. My mother's name is Jean Alberta Slater, and my father's name, my biological father's name, is Lloyd B. Simmons. My parents were married during the war, and I was one of those end-of-war babies. And I was, like I say, born in November, but by February of 1947, my parents were divorced, and so I never lived with my biological father. My mother remarried when I can't remember the exact date, but I was under 2 years old. And my stepfather was Neil Monroe Allred. And later on, when I was about in the 4th grade, I believe, he adopted us. My biological father had signed legal papers to allow my biological father to adopt my older brother and I. I have one older brother, Lloyd. He was named after our biological father. He was 4 years older than me, so he was born in 1942. And it's interesting that my older brother was born about 6 weeks prior to Faris's older brother, and our brothers died within about 6 weeks of each other, both 80 years old. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. I also have a younger brother, Mark Allred. He was born to my older brothers and my stepfather, Neil, and he was about 7 years younger than I was, whatever that age difference would be. My grandparents, who had a great impact in my life, my grandmother, this is on my mother's side of the family, my grandmother was Thelma Pearl Lamb, and my grandfather was Roy Baker Slater. And I'll tell you some stories about them in a few minutes. But my grandmother's mother was Addie Pearl Webb, and I did know her as a young girl. She was my great-grandmother, and I was told that the story of me when I was very young and first met my great-grandmother, I couldn't say the word great-grandmother. And when I said it, it came out great-botter. And that nickname stuck with her for the rest of her life. All of her great-grandchildren and all of her children and all of her grandchildren called her Great Botter from the time that I named her that. And it's kind of like us, our oldest great-grandson started calling me Grandma Great, and that has stuck with our great-grandchildren. Faris is Grandpa Great, and I'm Grandma Great. And it's interesting how those kind of nicknames stick. When I was in the 5th, 6th grade time frame, my mother became very ill and was unable to care for us as children. And so my stepfather's mother, Grandma Kirk, came to live with us. And my younger brother couldn't say Grandma Kirk, and it came out Ba Kirk. And so she became Ba Kirk to the family. So it's fun to see how children give nicknames to their grandparents. But my grandmother and grandfather were always grandmother and granddad. We never called my grandmother by any other nickname than grandmother. My earliest recollection in life is of me. We were living with my grandparents at the time. I don't know if my mother was remarried yet or not to my stepfather, but I remember being in the middle bedroom of their home in a crib, and it was dark. And I was kind of being fussy and probably throwing a fit. My grandmother was the most patient, kind, gentle woman, but I remember her coming into that bedroom and spanking me on the leg and telling me to lay down and be quiet. And I remember how it broke my heart that my grandmother would do such a terrible thing to me. And I know that's a funny thing to remember at such a young age, but it was not a story people told me. I actually remembered that event happening. A couple of other memories of when I was really young, and it taught me.
Your hand.
Oh, I forgot about that. I'll tell about that. It taught me that children's thinking to them can be very logical, but adults' way of thinking is that you're really naughty and a bad child. And as I raised my children, I tried to remember this experience because I remember how I felt. We lived in Monterey at the time, and I was about 3 or 4 years old, somewhere around there. And it had rained a lot, and there were wonderful mud puddles, deep mud puddles all over the area. And I decided I wanted to go wading in one of the mud puddles. And it was a little ways away from our home, which was further than I was supposed to go anyway. But in my child's mind, it was very logical that I should undress myself so I didn't get my clothes muddy. And then my mother would not be upset that I had gone wading in the mud puddle. Well, when my mother found me, she was very angry that I was naked and not by our house and playing in the mud puddles. But I had carefully laid my clothes outside of the mud puddles so they wouldn't get dirty and my mother wouldn't get mad at me for playing in the mud puddles. She spanked me all the way home, and she was so mad at me, and she was yelling at me. And there again, my heart was broken because in my mind, I had done a good thing by taking my clothes off. And in her mind, I was a naughty little girl for taking my clothes off. And I tried to remember that as a mother when I was thinking of the dumb things my kids did and trying to perceive their thought processes of it. Faris reminded me that when I was about 18 months old and we were still living at my grandparents' house, which we did off and on, the way the house was heated was through a furnace that would ignite, and it was built into the floor. And so there was a metal grate over the furnace. And my grandparents had a chair laid on its side in the hallway by that metal grate so that I would not walk on it when it was running. You had to be really careful. But as toddlers do, I climbed over the chair and I fell on that furnace, and I burnt both my hands quite severely and the side of my right leg. And I still have scars. The doctor told my mother that I probably would have a deformed hand because the burn was so severe that it would kind of go like this. But I was really blessed. We were not members of the church, so I didn't have a special blessing, but the Lord blessed me that my hand healed perfectly well, and I didn't have any, other than some scars, I didn't have any lasting problems with that. And I've always been grateful for that. When my father was a member of the church, but was not active. He used to call himself a Jack Mormon. He was a chain smoker. He was drank a lot, eventually became an alcoholic. But I was going somewhere with that. Oh, yeah. But my mother, one day my father was really sick, and some Mormon missionaries showed up at her door. And she said, I'm headed to the pharmacy to get some medicine for my husband who's too sick. I'm not interested. Eventually, the missionaries came back and tried to visit with her again. She, again, didn't particularly want to hear their message, but she took a copy of the Book of Mormon and agreed, just to get rid of them, to meet with them at a later time. To make a long story short, as she met with the missionaries, she grew to have a testimony of the church. And when I was 5 years old, my mother and older brother Lloyd were baptized. And I remember her baptism so clearly. We had a YMCA in the town, and that was the only public swimming pool at the time. And it was an outdoor pool. And that's where baptisms were held for our church. We didn't have a font. And they would wait till late at night after the swimming pool closed down, I think at 7 or 8. And then the church would be able to do the baptisms. And I remember at the time feeling very jealous of my brother and my mother that they got to be baptized, but I didn't get to be baptized, and I had to wait till I was 8 years old. I was so excited when I finally got to be baptized. And we lived by Fort Ord, California, which was a military base training new recruits. And so there were always a lot of young soldiers around. And at my baptism, I have no idea who baptized me. I can look at my baptismal certificate, but it wasn't somebody who was a friend or anything like that. It was just somebody from the ward. And I remembered that there were a lot of soldiers being baptized that day also. And I had a white dress on that I got to be baptized in. They didn't have the jumpsuits particularly. And my mother had a beaded purse, and I thought the talks were really boring. And so I was counting the colors of the different colors of the beads on her purse until it was time to get baptized. But the next day, when I was confirmed, I remember thinking that I had made a covenant with Jesus Christ. And that I wanted everybody in the ward to know Sorry. And that I believed in Jesus Christ and that I was happy to be a member of his church. And so I remember trying to get the courage to stand up to bear my testimony on the day after I was baptized. And I finally did, and I was able to share my testimony with the congregation of how happy I was to finally be a member of the church. One time we lived out on an acre of land, and it was at 52 Tustin Road. I remember that address. And we had a horse, and we had a goat, and we had chickens, and we had a cat, and we had a dog. And we grew a garden, and we thought we were farmers. And back in those days, little girls didn't very often wear pants. I wore play dresses all the time, and they almost always had a tie at the back of the dress. And I remember one time getting too close to the goat, and my back was turned to him, and the goat started chewing the tie on my dress, and I started screaming to my parents to come and save me because the goat was going to eat me. Another experience off Tustin Road, which I don't know if any of I think I told my kids this, but I had a girlfriend across the street, and her name was Barbara Knox. And Barbara and I decided one day that we were going to play hooky from school. My mother worked, my father worked, her father and mother worked, and so nobody would know that we played hooky from school. We decided to hang out at her house. We accidentally missed the bus, and so we were having a great time at her house, playing games and whatever we did, except her dad decided to come home at lunchtime, and we didn't want to get caught. So we went into their closet, her parents' closet, and we sat in her parents' closet for what seemed like eternity while her dad ate lunch and cleaned up the kitchen mess. He was there for quite a while. Then he finally left, and we thought, we're safe. Nobody's going to know that we played hooky from school. The problem is, later on in the day, I realized that it was primary day, and my mother would be expecting to pick me up at school to take me to primary. That was back in the olden days when primary was held on a weekday after school in the middle of the week. And so I called my mother and told her that I had missed the bus and that I wouldn't be at school to be picked up to go to primary. Of course, my mother knew that I didn't miss the bus, that I had played hooky. My friend and I were really in trouble, and we didn't get to see or play with each other for a whole month. And I never tried that trick again. What are some of the other things? When I was in, must have been, it's either in 8th grade or 9th grade. I don't remember which. But our ward was going to put on a 3-act play, and the name of the play was Copy Boy. And I tried out for the play, and I got, I think it was maybe the lead role. I think I was the copy boy, but I got one of the main parts and had to learn all the parts for the 3-act play, and we had to practice several times a week, and I thought it was great fun being in the play. I had tried out for a play in high school at one time and really wanted the part bad, but I didn't get in the play. And Dr. Henneford, who was the speech English drama director and was one of my favorite teachers, pulled me aside and said, the part was going to be given to either you or this other girl named Susan Nygaard. And he said, I gave it to Susan because I knew you had your youth group during the middle of the week, and you wouldn't give that up to come to practice. And so I missed the opportunity to be in that school play because of my commitment to my church activities. But it made me feel good that he recognized that value in me, and that meant a lot to me. Another time in high school when I was taking a speech class from Dr. Hannaford, there was a contest going around the valley for youth to prepare a talk on moral integrity imperative for survival. And he had assigned each of us to prepare a talk on that topic and to present it in class, which I did. It was just another assignment. But one day I was sick and had missed school, and I got a phone call saying that I had been selected from our school to represent our high school in that talk, and had to give the talk at I think it was Rotary Club. And I took second place for my talk, and I was pretty proud of that at that time. And my father was very proud of me because he was part of that club that was sponsoring this special contest. My activity in the church was very important to me, like I said, even from a youth. I received my first calling as soon as I graduated from primary. I was called to be the moonbeam teacher, which now would be equivalent to the nursery teacher. I prepared lessons for those little nursery kids, and I taught them for 7th and 8th grade. I graduated from primary in 6th grade and immediately got that calling. When I was in the 9th grade, I was called to teach primary, and I taught the rainbow class all through high school, because then again, remember, primary was in the middle of the week. During that time, I also had Sunday school callings periodically. I played the piano for junior Sunday school, and at one time I was chorister for junior Sunday school. So I didn't go to my Sunday school class, I went to junior Sunday school instead. One sacrament meeting, I was shocked when the bishop stood up and he was announcing people to be sustained. And they asked that I be sustained as the young woman's secretary. And my mouth dropped open and everybody raised their hands. And afterwards I went up to the bishop and I said, what is this, being sustained as the young women's secretary? And he goes, oh, I guess we forgot to ask you if you would be willing to do it. Will you be willing to do it? Of course I said yes. I was a junior in high school. But it required a lot of work that I don't think secretaries are required to do now. Every meeting I went to, I had to fill out this form in black ink saying exactly what went on in the meeting. I had to go to a stake meeting every month, which required us to travel 30 miles to the stake center, and they would instruct us on how to be good secretaries. And once a year, all the notes I took were bundled up, turned into the stake, and then they were sent to Salt Lake to put in that big vault. What's the vault that's in the mountain?
Granite Mountain.
Yeah, that's in Granite Mountain. So I have 2 years of very poor secretarial skills housed in the vault in Granite Mountain. When I was young, still in grade school, I loved going to church, and I just about drove one of my Sunday school teachers, Thelma Skanke, crazy. I was one of those kids who wanted to answer every question in Sunday school, and I'd raise my hand and wave it. I know. And if she was trying to tell a Book of Mormon or a Bible story, and I knew that story, I wanted to tell the whole story. I didn't want her to tell it. And one day I remember she got frustrated with me and she said, "Do you always have to tell the stories?" Because she wanted to be the teacher, and I was always trying to take that away from her. I took dance lessons as a little girl. I took piano lessons for 4 years, and my mother always liked drama, and she liked participating in talent shows, and she felt like I should do it too. And one time, she had me learn a song. I can't remember the name of it, but some of the words were, they hopped, they skipped, all over, now I can't remember the words, all over something. Anyway, she taught that to me, and she had me learn little dance moves and little actions to go with it, and then she entered me into this talent show. And so I did my thing, and they judged who won by how loud the applause was. And they had this little meter that showed the applause. And the applause was between myself and a man who played the accordion. We were about equal. And so we were standing up on the stage, and they would hold the hand over one of us and hold the hand over the other. And the last time they held the hand over each of us, the accordion player, somebody who, I think it was the MC, kind of really got the people applauding for him, so I just took second place. So my mother was very disappointed. Another time when I was taking dancing lessons, I was also a brownie, so we had the little brown dress uniforms. The school was putting on a special play, and there was a song about a tumbleweed. And they asked who knew how to dance. And of course, I raised my hands. I was always wanting to be in the limelight, I guess. And I said I could dance. And so the school director wanted to know if I would be willing to put a real tumbleweed, over my head. And when they were singing the song, if I would twirl around the stage like a tumbleweed. Of course, I couldn't see. And they dug a hole so that it would fit over my head. And when my cue came on, I did my twirlies all across the stage. And when we took the tumbleweed off, my face was all scratched up. And the teacher the one who was in charge felt so bad that a few days later, she called me into her office, and she had given me this really cute, it was just a little cute like purse or coin bag for doing such a great job of being a tumbleweed. That was my one claim to fame as a dancer. I think that's about good enough.
No.
No, what am I leaving out?
Moss Landing and
Oh,
all that kind of stuff.
yeah,
Your bike rides.
yeah, that's right.
Santa Cruz and
Thing behind that pillow.
That's when we're married. So I had a group of 4 friends, and we loved going on bike rides. And we decided to form a club, and we were called the Travelers Club. And we bought matching slacks and matching white blouses. The slacks were blue and the blouses were white, and we had written on it Travelers Club. We had somebody embroider Travelers Club. And we would go on bike rides on Saturday and take a lunch and wear our uniform. We'd ride up into the mountains, which weren't, I mean, we rode a long way, 15, 20 miles in a day. And we also rode to the nearest beach, which I think was about 15 miles away, called Moss Landing. As a young girl, we spent a lot of time at the ocean, at Santa Cruz, at Monterey Bay. That was one of our favorite things to do as a family. One other thing I got to do that was really special, I got to go to the Seattle World's Fair, and I think it was in 1962. And I remember they showed a microwave. And we looked at that, my mother and I looked at that and thought, no way, that won't ever come to pass. That's just a pie in the sky, futuristic thing. And then, of course, microwaves became an everyday household thing. I also remember at the World's Fair, they had this big cage, and there were $1 million silver dollars in this big cage. And of course, there was security all around it. And there was a sign, free silver dollars given on the second Tuesday of each week. And it was on a Tuesday that we went, and I said, Dad, guess what? We get to give free silver dollars. It took him forever to help, for my dad to teach me or to help me understand there isn't a second Tuesday of each week. I was adamant I was going to get one of those silver dollars. So we took a vacation every week. Every year we had a family vacation to someplace, and we got to see a lot of fun places growing up. But yeah, that's good. Can you think of anything else? I think we ought to move on to our life.
Well, she, in her high school years, in her later high school years,
there is something I want to say.
her dad went and bought a new company car. Now you got to
No,
realize
a family car.
Family car, yeah, like a family car, and they had three children, and of course,
well, only two
Lloyd
children living at home.
Yeah, Lloyd was gone by then. Two children and mom and dad. Well, the car he bought was an L88 64, 63 Corvette.
Stingray
with a split window. That's the only one they had. It's a Stingray. It was a Corvette Stingray. And when they would go somewhere, even they would pull a trailer with it.
A junkie house trailer.
And she would have to sit in the back seat, kind of with Mark.
There was no back seat.
When there's no back seat, there's a flat.
So we'd have to kind of curl up.
And this car had been raced, because that engine wasn't even available till '66.
Yeah,
but
it was raced.
They had the engine before that, but it was in this car, and it was so she was pretty cool driving up and down Main Street in Salinas in this Corvette.
Yeah. I had a lot of boys become interested in me once we got the Stingray. I did want to say something about my grandparents, though, because three really good memories of them. My grandparents, once a year, would take my older brother and I. This was before my younger brother was born. They would take us for the weekend. And we would go, at first they had what was called a cabin cruiser in Sausalito, which was on San Francisco Bay. And they would come and get us, and we would go to San Francisco. We would visit the Golden Gate Park, go to the zoo, and just do all kinds of fun things. And then we would go over to the Golden Gate Bridge to Sausalito and spend the night on their cabin cruiser. And they would spoil us rotten. It was always so much fun. Then they got a new cabin cruiser, and it was on the Sacramento and San Joaquin River. And we would still get to go up once a year without our parents, with just our grandparents. And my grandfather taught me how to play gin rummy, and my grandmother would cook all kinds of food and have treats, and it was just a really fun, happy memory that we had with my grandparents. One story about my grandmother.
And you caught that striper.
Oh yeah, that wasn't with my grandparents. That was when we took a
Okay.
week-long vacation. My parents and my brothers and I had a week-long vacation on their cabin cruiser and spent the whole week going up and down the San Joaquin River. And I was fishing and caught a really nice striped bass, and it gave me a taste of wanting to go fishing often. But that was one of the nicest fish I ever caught, and it was a lot of fun. One experience with my grandmother was she had come to pick us up for this yearly trip, and we would spend the night at their house and then leave in the morning. And this was when we lived out on Tustin Road, so it was quite a ways into town. And we saw a black lady that was stranded with her car on the side of the road. And my grandmother pulled off to see what her problem was, and she said, "I've run out of gas," and it was about 5 miles to the nearest gas station. And my grandmother said, "Well, I'll just push you." And my grandmother did. She put her car up to that lady's bumper, and they crept along, and she pushed her to the gas station. I would never have the guts to push another car, but my grandmother did it. And then the lady said, "I don't have any money." And so my grandmother gave her a $5 bill, which was enough back then to fill up the car with gas. I never thought another thing of it. That's the kind of woman my grandmother was.
Cars back in those days were built, and the bumpers were built so that if it would fit up against another bumper, you could push another car for however far you needed. It was
But I'd
common
still
in
be
those days.
scared to do it.
Oh, yes.
Still be scared to do it.
Yeah.
Another memory of my grandfather, a special memory of my grandfather, was for a very short period of time, like 2 years, when I was a teenager, my grandparents separated. And my grandfather was a printer, had his own printing shop by profession. And so when my grandparents separated, he opened a new printing shop in a neighboring town, Gilroy. And it was about, about a 30, 40-minute ride by Greyhound, or by bus. It was Greyhound bus from where I lived to where my grandfather's new printing shop was. And one summer, he invited me to ride the bus every day, to go up there, and I would ride the bus in the morning, and I would work with my grandfather in his print shop all day long. I would coilette things, staple them together, fold things, whatever he needed doing, I would do while he ran the printing shop. And that was a great experience. We'd go to lunch together, we would sit and visit together, and it was a real sweet bonding time for me and my grandfather. But I was very happy when my grandparents decided they really didn't want to be separated and wanted to be together. And then he moved back and continued. He sold his print shop in Gilroy and continued with his print shop, which was the El Camino Press. And I was really privileged when that they had that print shop, because for my graduation announcement, I had really unique announcements and didn't have to pay a penny for them, and they had my little picture in it. And then when we got married, they also printed all of our wedding invitations and thank you cards and stuff like that. So it was a lot of fun. So I think that does it. So now we're going to,
Get married.
well, that takes 3 years. So we're going to tell how we met.
Okay,
You start it.
okay. Fall of 1964, I went to BYU. I'd straightened out with BYU so I wouldn't have to go check into a girls' dorm. And I went into Hinckley Hall, and the first day I was there, right next to Hinckley Hall, I think it's all still the same there, was a facility called Cannon Center. And it was where everybody in Hinckley Halls, there was 5 or 6 of them, where all the students that stayed there ate their meals. And so first I was there, and I understood when I got there that they had a dance at Cannon Center that night. So I went over to the Cannon Center to the dance. And I remember going in there,
It's driving me nuts.
I can hear you scratching it. It sounds awkward, but
anyway, so I went in there to Cannon Center, and I looked over in the corner, and here was this blonde standing there. She had the finest features, just her high cheekbones, her beautiful face, just the structure of her face, the way she looked. And she was in a yellow outfit, and I immediately migrated to her and asked her to dance. And I don't remember how many times we danced. We probably danced with other people, but I believe I walked you home at the end of the
You
day.
did walk me home.
And that was where Pat McMullin, Pat Allred and I met. And I had to walk her across campus because she lived in Bowen Hall, which is all the way across campus. And so I walked her all the way across campus and after the dance. And it was nice.
But you have to understand that he didn't tell me his name was Faris McMullin. He told me his name was Ferris Wheel. And for the next few dates, whenever I introduced him to roommates or friends, I introduced him as my date as Ferris Wheel. And I wrote, now his name is F-A-R-I-S, but he didn't tell me that, and I spelt it F-E-R-R-I-S. And I wrote a letter to my mother, and I said, I'm dating this guy named Ferris Wheel. Can you believe anybody would name their child Ferris Wheel? Anyway, I went on and on to my mother about his name. And it wasn't for about a month later, at least a month later, that he finally told me his last name was McMullin, not Wheel. I don't remember much about what we did for dates.
No, we liked to go down where the Rose Garden was, and there was a swing set there, and it was up above the Botanical Garden.
Yeah, it was
If you've
fun.
been to BYU, you know where the Botanical Garden was. I don't know. It's on the
probably
south side
changed by now.
on the south side of campus. Anyway, it was a nice place. We used to go there and sit and visit and swing on the swings. And
We liked to drink cherry limes at the Wilkinson Center.
yeah,
And we never did go to an official dance. He arranged for me to go to homecoming dance with one of his friends because he didn't have any money to take me, but he didn't tell me that. And I felt bad that he didn't want to take me, and he shooed me off to his friend. And all his friend did was talk about this girl he liked the whole night. So it was a really dumb date. And one time we double dated to a football game
Utah.
and ran out of gas
Yeah.
and went and asked a farmer who had a gas tank if he would let us buy some gas from him so we could get home.
to
And I
Provo.
had to call my dorm mother to tell her we were going to be past curfew and I could get that special permission slip to not be home by midnight.
Yeah.
And
And we had to put sacks over our head at the football game because BYU got beat so bad
yeah, they
by
really got
University of
slaughtered.
Utah.
But anyway, we that was about the extent of our dating. And then just before Thanksgiving time, he dropped a bomb on me. He said, "Oh, I just wanted you to know that we're not going to date anymore because I have a girlfriend back home and I'm going to stay true to her. And when semester is over, I'm going to go back to her and I'll be back to school next year when I can come back with Janet Dudley." And that really took me by surprise, and I wasn't very happy about it. Then in January, at the end of the semester, I was up selling my old school books and getting new school books for the next semester. And I started down the stairs and I saw Faris coming up the stairs. So I turned around and then kind of organized it or orchestrated it so that we'd kind of run into each other, which we did. So we decided to go to Cannon Center and catch up and have a cherry lime for old time's sake, because he was leaving, I think, the next day.
Yeah, something like that. Or soon. This is during finals. This is during finals.
Yeah, but I think it was the night before you were going to leave.
Okay.
But I may be wrong. But anyway, you tell him about the final.
Well, I saw her there, and wow. Every time I saw her, it was always a wow factor. But anyway, but we went and had this time, and we spent this time in Cannon Center and visited with each other. And I didn't tell her about this, but I was on my way to my Book of Mormon final when I met her. So I flunked Book of Mormon because I didn't take my final exam for Book of Mormon.
Because we were having a
We
cherry
were-
lime
we were
together,
having a
catching
cherry
up.
lime. I figured that was more important.
But we didn't know. I didn't know, or I would have made him go to his final.
And subsequent to that, I think Heavenly Father probably planned for me to skip my Book of Mormon final. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had that last memory of
And we
each
went
other.
out that night.
Yeah.
We went out that
So
night.
it was, yeah.
So then he went home to his girlfriend, Janet Dudley.
I went home to my girlfriend, Janet Dudley, but most of the time when I was there, my mom said I talked about Pat.
And I was dating all kinds of other guys.
Yeah.
That year I was voted in my dorm the most dated girl in the whole
I
Bowen
believe it.
Center. Anyway, I had a lot of dates. Sometimes I would have 2 dates in one day. I'd come home from one and go on another. So I had a great time. But I always thought about him. In fact, during the summertime, when I went home, I was dating an old high school friend of mine, and all I could do was talk about Faris to this guy. So I wrote you a letter, and maybe that's
That must be where I got
where you
your
got my address. So anyway, fast forward to fall of 1965. I have a new boyfriend, Daryl Garner. He's there with his girlfriend, Janet Dudley. We happened to run into each other on campus multiple times. And then you tell your part of the story about drafting.
Oh. And anyway, I received this draft notice in November. I received it on my mother's birthday. Received a draft notice. And I was headed off to the military, and which I did. And while I was gone, well, anyway, I got ready to go, and before I left, I checked out of school because I was going to be in the military. I didn't have time. I wasn't going to be able to finish the semester, so I checked out of school, and I went back up to Canada, and anyway, and then I went into the mill. I went to Fort Polk, Louisiana, and the interesting thing is, in Fort Polk, Louisiana, there were people from the South. One specific person, I don't remember who he was, but he came up to me and he says, how did you get, since you're from Canada, how did you get from down to the United States border? Did you get there on your dog sled? Or how did you get there? And I said, yeah, I got there on my dog sled. I mean,
The guy was serious.
had no idea where Canada was or what it was like in Canada. Anyway, so I got in the military, and then when I was there, I went through what's called, I went to schooling. After basic training, I went to schooling. And at the schooling, I was trained to be an aircraft mechanic, mostly on helicopters. We had training on fixed wing, but mostly on helicopters. And so it was interesting. My last school I went to, I got sick. When I was in high school, I had a duodenal ulcer and was out of school for 3 weeks. Anyway, so this ulcer was acting up again. So I was in the hospital for a week. And when I got out of that, they said, well, you've missed this much training, so you're going to have to be recycled. So I spent the rest of that 6-week class for that particular segment of it. I spent all of that just doing odd jobs around the company area and et cetera, et cetera. And anyway, they finally graduated the class, and everybody got back there, and some of the guys were laughing. And I said, it was cool that they graduated now, and they were going to get to go off and do something rather than go to those dumb classes. And the guy laughed. He says, well, he said, it's interesting. He says, you graduated in the top 10 of the class, so you're going to go get, so I got orders to go, and I'd never ever been to this class to fix this on this helicopter. Anyway, I graduated in the top 10 of the class without ever going. And that didn't bother me a whole lot. So anyway, from there, I got sent to Alaska. She continued, then what did you do?
So while he was doing this, I had dropped out of school likewise because
You finished that semester.
I finished the semester, yes. Yeah. But I went home at semester because my boyfriend was going on a mission. And I was working for a family history teacher, helping him do research. And he was going to put me on salary because I was doing it volunteer, and then he was going to put me on salary. But where my boyfriend was going on his mission, he would be at that same building for 2 months while he learned the Spanish language. And so to take away from temptation of us running into each other, I decided to go home and go to work, get a job, and I worked for the local telephone company as a telegraph operator. And so I didn't date. I was faithfully waiting for my missionary. I had waited for him for 6 months. And then, it's your turn.
Well, I'm up there in Alaska, and I'm up there, and I'm thinking, goodness gracious, I'm up here. I'm not going to get to go on a mission. Back then, they were very limited on who who could go on missions and who had to be available for the draft. Anyway, I got drafted. So I'm there in the military, and I'm sitting in my room there at Fort Wainwright, Alaska, and I made a list of girls. I said, well, maybe I ought to think about getting married. So I made a list of girls, and on my way up there from once I'd been through my training, I stopped in Raymond to see my mom before I went to Alaska, and when I did that, I found that Janet Dudley, who was my girlfriend, was getting married while I was there. So I actually went over and went to her reception. And it was pretty quiet when I walked up to the line.
I bet it was.
Anyway, she married a very well-to-do fellow from Hawaii whose family owned a bunch of pineapple plantations and stuff like that. Smart girl to marry somebody with a lot of money. Anyway, it didn't work. They got divorced later on. So I've started raking this list out. You got Cheryl Bennett. You got.
You don't have to list the girls.
I don't know them all. I don't remember them all. I list all these girls, and I get this whole big list made. And I said, well, I don't want to marry this one because of this. I don't want to marry this and this. I don't want to marry this. So I checked off the whole list, and they were all gone. And I said, well, you know what? Pat Allred, she checks off everything perfectly. The only one that, she wasn't even on the list.
Yeah, I didn't
So I wrote
make
her
the list.
I wrote her a letter and basically told her I thought we ought to get married. And I hadn't seen her for quite a long time.
Yeah, it had been, well, we saw each other just before, because you told me about being drafted.
Yeah.
So November of 65, and I get this letter in June of 66.
Yeah.
And this literally happened. I opened the letter, and as I started reading the letter, a voice clear as a bell in my mind said, "This is the man you're going to marry." And I said, "Oh, no, it's not. I'm waiting for a missionary, and I'm faithful to my missionary." But I wrote a letter back, back in the slow mail days. So I wrote a letter back, and he wrote me back a second letter, and I opened it up. Very same thing happened. "This is the man you're going to marry." And I thought, really? So I decided I had to fast and pray about it, and I wanted a sign. And so as I fasted and prayed, I asked Heavenly Father if this really was who I was supposed to marry, to please have my missionary send me a Dear Jane. Within 2 weeks, I had a Dear Jane. Later on down the road, several months later, on my birthday, that missionary called me up, which was totally against the rules, and he said, "I didn't mean a word of what I said in that letter. I don't know why I wrote that letter. It just came over me to write it. Will you still wait for me?" And I had to say, "No, I'm sorry." But that was my sign. And I knew that Heavenly Father had planned for us to get married. So we started writing regularly.
She didn't read that scripture that says, "'Tis a wicked and adulterous nation that seeketh after a sign." But she's always cut deals with the Lord. She's a great deal cutter with the Lord, by the way.
I had faith that if I fasted and prayed, Heavenly Father would reveal to me His will, which He did. So that's in June that He wrote that first letter of 66. So he's in Alaska, I'm in California. We're just courting through letters. Then in December of 66. He comes down to California and spends 10 days with me, and we decide, yes, we're going to get married. Then he goes back up to Alaska and comes back down 2 days, well, probably 3 days or 4 days
I don't
before we
know.
were to get married, because
We had to
we
go
went
get
to the
endowed.
temple. We were endowed on the 9th of August, and we were married on the 11th of August. So he came down. But the funny thing is, the night before he was to catch a plane, he had no money to pay for the ticket.
Or I didn't have enough or something.
Yeah, so tell the story about that.
I didn't have enough money to pay for a ticket, so I got a hold of the guys in the barracks where I was. I had a private room. I had a personal room, and some of them had 2 people, but I had a personal room. Anyway, and I had a poker game. And I won enough money to finish buying an airplane ticket to get to California. So I went to California with basically not much money, but I just got there. That's all. I'm going to my wedding, and I haven't done any planning, of course, because I'm up there and she's down there, and
I bought the wedding rings.
she bought the wedding
We
rings.
had
I didn't have the
matching
money.
wedding bands. My mother and I, are mostly me, planned the wedding. I would just write to him and tell him what was going on. And I communicated with his family about it. So anyway, he came down and we were endowed on...
And everybody, and I told people in the ward I was going to California
Yeah.
to get married.
They didn't believe him.
Nobody believed me, so.
They didn't believe him. So we got married. My grandparents had given us a wedding gift of $200. So we stashed enough of it away that we would have money to buy food and start housekeeping. And it seems like every time we just about were out of cash, some aunt or uncle would give us a $50 bill or a $100 bill. We never knew what we were
Probably
going
a
to do.
10 or a 20 because.
No, they were 50s. I have it written
Oh,
in
that right? Hmm.
in our wedding book. But anyway, we always managed to have enough money. And we had a reception in California, which he drove him crazy. He's never liked wedding receptions. He didn't like our wedding receptions. He
Still
didn't
don't.
like our kids' wedding receptions. He doesn't like them. And he spent the whole night. Is it time to go yet? Do we have to stay here any longer? He did not like meeting all the people, and I loved it. I thought it was just the greatest thing ever. My parents had a trailer in the Big Sur, one of the state parks, that they had purchased the rights to this plot, and so we spent our honeymoon there. Then we came back and opened gifts, which I thought opening gifts was just magical to me. He thought it was boring. Then we flew up to Canada so I could meet his side of the family, have another reception. Every time we walked down Main Street. By the way, this is a cousin so-and-so. This is an aunt so-and-so. This is a cousin. The whole town was related to him. So then we had our second reception. And then I was kind of like the bored one because I didn't know anybody. And they were coming through meeting him, which was fine. Then as we opened up all the wedding gifts from the second reception, I was just having the greatest time of my life. And we got a lot of handmade pillowcases with embroidery, and we got a lot of dish towels. And he was so bored with it, he finally started grabbing the presents from me and saying, more hand towels, throwing them down, more pillowcases, throwing them down. He just wanted this over with so he could get on with enjoying life. While we were on our honeymoon, we were listening to the radio. And the radio said, the news said, that Fairbanks was under 9 feet of water. It had flooded. And this is where we were going. We didn't know if all the stuff my parents had sent up ahead of time to set up housekeeping would be there when we got there. But he had orders and he had to be back. And so we flew back to, my parents had bought the airplane tickets. We flew into to Fairbanks, not knowing where we could live, not knowing if there was going to be military housing, having no money. We got housing in the guest,
BOQs.
which is
Bachelor's
like,
officers' quarters.
so it's like a really dumpy hotel for, there's twin beds and a bathroom that you share with another room. No electricity, flashlights, no hot water. And we didn't know if we were going to get housing. I mean, we just went by the seat of our pants day by day, basically. But we were able to get housing. There was no hot water for several weeks. We could not have a telephone yet. There wasn't telephones. When we first got there, they announced that we were going to have a clean the church party. I mean, I was in the kitchen, which was in the basement, and it had flooded, and you open the cupboards and you're just digging out the silt and the mud and everything. And somebody said to me, "Well, you're new. Where'd you come from?" And I said, "I'm Pat McMullin. I'm married to Faris." "What? He told us he was getting married. We didn't believe him." So it was all the talk. And I was really young looking, and he was really young looking. And one day when I was waiting for him to get home from work, when we were just, the first few days, we were in a townhouse, and the neighbor that we shared stairs with, the high school girl came out, and she sat down talking to me on the step. And she said, anyway, she didn't realize I was married. She thought I was a daughter of whoever was living in that house, and she was surprised I was married. And there were 2 bedrooms in the townhouse, and one faced the parking lot. And I would wait in the second bedroom when I knew it was close to time for Faris to be home, and I would sit there and look out the window for him to come home. And one night when he came home from work, and he knew that I don't like cats, he had this little kitten, and he knew I would be at the window, and he looked up just like a little kid begging his mom, and held up the kitten and gave me this little boyish look like, "Please, can I keep it?" And he named that cat Cat, and it was a Blue Point Siamese, and he loved that cat. Mm-hmm. Every night when he went to bed, Faris would meow this special meow, and he'd go like this, and the cat would come running and plop right on his chest. And he'd sit in Faris's lap at meals, and he cupped his hands, his paws like hands, and he would sit up in Faris's lap and look over his plate of food and decide what he wanted to eat, and then he'd go like this and eat it. And eat it, right? Do you have other things you want to say about Cat?
No, not really.
Okay. We had a great time.
We did. We truly enjoyed being a long way away from phones and everything else, because we at that time we did go down and buy a little TV for $100.
A little black and
a
white.
little dingy 19-inch TV for $100, and that's what we had for TV. And but I don't know. We just never did anything without the other person,
Unless he was hunting.
unless I went hunting. I went hunting one time for 2 days and left her alone in her apartment with nothing else, no phone,
No friend.
nothing.
We'd been married 3 weeks. And
So-
his friend was going hunting alone, which is dangerous in Alaska. So he didn't want his friend to go alone. They lived around the corner from us. No phone, no hot water, no TV at that time, not even a book to read. I didn't have a job. And he left me.
Yep, she never forgave me for that.
But we didn't have a fight over it. I was just sad.
That's one thing about us is we've been married 56, going in 57 years, and we've never had a crossword between us.
Honest.
And she's just too special to me to ever have confrontation. I just can't. Matter of fact, I can't understand why people who are married to each other say care for each other the way we do. How they could ever have contention between them. And so we, yeah.
So while he was in the military, I had 3 different jobs while we were in Alaska. The first one, I actually worked for NASA tracking station. I didn't work there very long because I was a California girl. The tracking station was 14 miles out of Fairbanks. And at the first snowfall and the slippery roads, I quit. I wasn't going to go there, do that anymore. Then I worked for a couple babysitting their kids. And he worked for the
Department of Indian Affairs. Or something.
Yeah, Department of Indian Affairs. And when I became pregnant and they knew I was expecting a baby, one time when he was out in a remote village where he was working with real Eskimos, it's one of my stories. He brought me this little set of mucklucks. This is genuine caribou hide chewed to soften it by a Eskimo woman. So they chew it to soften it and make it flexible. This is rabbit fur from a rabbit, and then she hand beaded it. Unfortunately, after 2 kids, one of our dogs
got a hold of it.
And I just about killed him. I was really mad. But I have saved these all this year because they are a very unique and special gift that our first 2 kids wore.
Yeah.
So I wanted to share that. Alaska was a real learning experience for me coming from California. We saw as cold as 65 degrees below zero. We, winter time, it's like, in Fairbanks, it's like dark all day, and it gets a little dusky for about 45 minutes, if I'm about right. Seems like that's all it
maybe an
was.
hour or so.
And then it's dark again. To go to church, the women would wear pants and boots under their dresses, and then we'd all stand in the coat closet stripping the slacks off and taking the boots off and putting Sunday clothes on. I don't know how people did it with kids in Alaska. The summers were long days. I was in the Young Women Presidency, and we were out making visits, and we weren't even paying attention to the time, and we were knocking on doors at 10 o'clock at night. And when we came home, Faris had just gotten in the car to come looking for me. He was freaking out because I was gone so long. But anyway, we had a lot of fun. We went shooting, we went fishing, we went camping once to Valdez. And he liked to blow things up back then. Now he would be arrested for the things that he did. But he would make people used to just dump stuff out in the boonies, like old washers, old dryers. They just take them and dump them. And so he liked to make bombs and then go find one of these old things and then blow it up. But can't do that now. And one fun experience we had is we decided to make homemade root beer. And so we had a basement, and on the going down, there were shelves.
At the top, there was a series of shelves at the very top.
So we made our root beer, we put it in the bottles, we corked the bottles,
With corks.
but they were laying on their side. One night in the middle of the night, we heard pop, crash, pop, crash, and the bottles were exploding, rolling down the stairs, root beer everywhere, glass shattered everywhere. It was quite a mess and fun to remember.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've been blessed with 11 children and 48 grandchildren. One more is due at the end of July, August, and 13 great-grandchildren.
Yeah. We have to leave Alaska. When we left Alaska, I got out of the military. And so she was very pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to get our car and stuff down the highway. And the Alaska highway is 2,400 miles long. And it's gravel road most of the way.
In the middle of winter.
And it's December. So anyway, we decided I would get in the car and I would drive all the way down. And I would drive to Seattle. And then on such and such a day, she would fly into Seattle. And then she would have to get a hotel or something. And then I would come into town and I would find her. Now, there's no cell phones, there's no email, there's no nothing here. So I got in the car and took off, and I drove. This is a gravel road. I'm driving this road all the way down, and I get out by Watson Lake, and I'm out in the square root of nothing. There's no town anywhere close to this. I come to this corner, and I start to go into this corner, and this 18-wheel truck comes up, and he drives right down into the, and I had to get off the road. I had to go off the road. So there I am in the snow I'm in a '66 Mustang, and I'm off the road in the middle of nowhere. I hadn't seen a car for a long time till this truck came along and ran me off the road. So I get out and I shovel my way out. I shoveled all the snow from underneath the car and behind and in front of the tires and shoveled a track all the way out onto the road. Got back in the car and drove out. And anyway, so I drove for I think 3 or 4 days, probably 4 days.
Yeah, I thought it was more like 5, but
Well, 4 or 5 days anyway. It's quite a while. And I finally get down to Seattle. So all I did was I drove to the airport and I went to the United Airlines booth and I said, my wife is supposed to have flown in here and she should be here somewhere. She flew in on United Airlines and should have left a note here for me.
which I did.
Yes. And she had, so they gave me the note. And so I was able to find where she was perched. Anyway, so we got out. And So we were headed to Canada, to go back up to Canada. And we took off, and I've always been one that had a need for speed. So we go flying along. I don't know if you've driven from Seattle to Spokane before, but you get out there, get out there by Moses Lake area. It's out there in the flat, there's nothing there. And we get out there driving along, and I look in the rearview mirror, and there's this Chrysler, big Chrysler, and it's coming up closely fast behind us. And then it turns its lights on. It didn't have a marked car, but it turned its lights on there. You could see the lights. They were in the grill or something. So I pull over and stop, and the police officer comes up and says, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, I just got out of the military, and we're headed back to Canada. My wife's really pregnant. We're headed back to Canada where my family's from. And I know we're in a hurry." And he says, "In a hurry?" He says, "I've been trying to catch you ever since you left Seattle." He didn't give us a ticket, and he said, "Just slow down, will you?"
Yeah, we were really lucky.
Yeah, so anyway, yeah.
That's a long pursuit.
It's an hour and a half or 2 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a long one. It wasn't an hour and a half, 2 hours then, because we were really going fast.
So our baby was due towards the end of December, and all I wanted for Christmas was my baby, my very own baby. And Faris says, "You can't have the baby before Christmas." I says, "But I want the baby." Anyway, he sent me up to our bedroom, and he said, "You can't come out of the bedroom until I tell you you can." Once again, no TV, no book, nothing to do except stare at the walls and try to take a nap. So anyway, I could hear my sewing machine going like crazy. And I thought, what in the world is he doing? Anyway, after what seemed like forever, the sewing machine stopped, and he had me come out, and his lips were zipped. Had no idea what he was sewing. Well, he was insistent that I not have the baby till after Christmas. So, back up to my childhood. My mother didn't believe in Santa Claus. So because she didn't believe in Santa Claus never visited our home. I one time hung one of my little stockings that I wore up on the wall with a piece of Scotch tape. And she said, "Santa Claus doesn't visit our house because I don't believe in him. So there will be no candy in it in the morning." Sure enough, in the morning, there was no candy. So that's just preface to this. So anyway, Christmas morning comes. And I go downstairs. Now, mind you, this has been used many years, and it has been retired. But downstairs was my very first ever Christmas stocking. And it was filled with presents. Of course, there was a lot of newspaper in it too. But all my Christmas presents were in it. A doll was sticking out of it.
And
a giant, great big candy cane was sticking out of it.
A great big candy cane like this.
Yeah, it was awesome. And another Christmas stocking full of the typical Christmas stocking treats. The PJ is my middle name. It was bright red and it was beautiful, but for many years we used it as part of our decorations, and sometimes it was outside on the front porch, and that's why it got all faded. And then we were going through things, and my husband wanted to know, why in the world I kept this threadbare piece of junk. And I started to cry. I says, you can't take that special treasure away from me. And it remains in my cedar chest to this day. A real treasure.
Yeah.
So I wanted to make sure we shared that story. And then our baby was born 2 days later. A beautiful baby girl. So we moved around a lot.
We did move around a lot. All I ever wanted to be was a doctor, and but when I got out of the military, actually, when we got back from that time, we went down. I thought, I ought to go learn to fly, so we went down to Southern California, where I had an uncle living, and I left her with her mother up in Salinas, and I went down and stayed with my uncle and aunt while I took private pilot's license training. And then I was going to try to get some helicopter training so I could actually fly helicopters in the summer and put us through school. Anyway, suffice it to say, none of that part worked out. I didn't have any way to support them, so I said, well, until I can figure that out, I guess I went back in the military. And I went back in the military. I went down to a recruiting agent and I said, I want to go to flight school. And he said, well, the best way for you to go to flight school is not to enlist to go to flight school, but just to go to a school and then apply for it. I said, okay. So I believed him and I went and signed up and got my first orders, and my first orders were to Vietnam.
He left 7 days after our second child was born. So I went home to stay with my mom again. I had moved down to Los Angeles with him, and we went back, and my mother invited me to stay with the kids and her while he was in Vietnam, which I did, which was really nice to have somebody to visit with, and we were able to bless Nolan.
Mm-hmm.
Before he left for Vietnam, and we wrote to each other every day. We tried talking on the phone once or twice.
Once.
And that was so
dumb.
Yeah. It's like you went through a ham operator, so every time you said a sentence, you had to say over. Very impersonal, just not fulfilling at all. So we decided we weren't going to do that, and we just kept with the letter writing.
Yeah. When I was in Vietnam, I was an aircraft mechanic, and but I quickly went from being an E5 to an E6 to a staff sergeant, and but I had enough rapport with the people there that they had a shortage of aircraft mechanics in the 101st Airborne Division where I was. So I was tasked with organizing a school to train aircraft mechanics. So I did. I organized everything from bringing them in, going through the schooling part of it so they can understand things basically about aircraft, and then manage the people going through the different places to learn different parts, because you have quite a few different shops. And so I managed all of that, and when I got done with that, I was close to coming home, and anyway, it went from the company commander and the platoon commander that I worked with. They determined to put me in for a direct commission for what I'd accomplished over there. I did get letters of commendation and stuff too, but getting a direct commission is something rarely happens in the military. It happened a lot in World War II, but not in Vietnam. Anyway, they got the paperwork all up to the commanding general to approve, to get it done. And they gave him orders, and he left to go to Cambodia, and it got lost, and nothing ever happened.
Never
on
happened.
That. Never happened. So
That was the history of our military experience.
yeah,
He was supposed to go to OCS, Officer Candidate School, and that paperwork got lost. When we were stationed at BYU, they changed, the pay was changed to computer generated pay. And out of 22 months, 11 of those months, we either didn't get a paycheck or it was shortchanged. And then we'd have to wait for them to correct it. And it just messed up our finances terribly. And we just got fed up and said, you know, we're not supposed to be in the military. Everything goes wrong. So we got out of the military.
Yeah, and I went to work for a chemical company in Texas, and we lived down there for a couple of years. And then we went back to Calgary with working for the same chemical company, and worked for them there for a year and a half, and I just didn't enjoy it. So we left that and went down to Utah, and anyway, we bounced around. We've bounced all over. We've moved 24 times, and
When we moved to Boise, we had been married 20 years, and we had moved 22 times.
22 times.
But then we spent 10 years in one house, 17 years in another,
And
10
we're-
months in a rental while we found this house, and then we've been here 8.5 years.
Yeah.
So we've been much more settled, and we decided we were supposed to come to Boise because that's where all of our kids, most of them, found their spouses.
Well, I'll tell you how that happened. I was the at that time I was a high priest. I got the job when I was a 70, of being the senior president 70 in the stake. But then they changed it to, we got rid of 70s and awards and stakes. And so I became just the stake mission president as a high priest. And the stake president told me, he said, there's a blessing for you. So he went and got a blessing. And I'd been looking at maybe acquiring a fishing rod company in Woodland, Washington. And so we'd been over there, and we'd looked at houses and stuff like that. And anyway, the president told me, he said, I've got a blessing for you. So we went there, and he gave me a blessing, and he said, you are looking in the wrong places. You need to find where you're going. It didn't say where I was supposed to go. It just said you're looking in the wrong places. So the next time I made a trip out I would go over there and stay for a week to 10 days.
We were in Provo, did we say that?
We were in Provo. And then I'd go over to Woodland, Washington for a week to 10 days, and then come back home for a couple of days and go back. Because we were trying to get this company straightened out so it'd be worth buying. Anyway, so I'm coming back from Woodland, and I get to Boise, and it's dark. It's nighttime. And I had one of my headlights go out. Is that great? So I pulled off at Gowan Road area where it drops.
I thought you pulled off at Broadway
No, it's
and
not
went
Broadway.
down to that.
It's
or
down where.
Vista?
Yeah, I think it's more Gowan. Or Vista. Well, no, not Vista, it's Gowan. And you drop down there, and used to be a Fred Meyer down there. and that it's gone now. But anyway, so I dropped down there, and as I pull into the parking lot to go to Fred Meyer, there's a newspaper stand sitting there, and the Spirit said, "Buy a newspaper." And I said, "You got to be kidding." So I got a newspaper. I got my headlight. I went back home, and I walk into where Pat is, and I lay the newspaper down, and she looks at it and sees what it's from, and she says, "You got to be kidding." Anyway, so we moved to Boise, lock, stock, and barrel. We got here on March 18th, 1988. And it was a miserable day. And the realtor we'd talked to about having a house for us to rent, called him when we got here. We're here, we're ready to go to our house. And he says, "Oh, well, that house is no longer available." They decided not to move. So we're there in the park. We got all our kids. We got all our stuff's coming up from Provo.
No place to live.
No place to live. Anyway, so
10 kids with us.
10 kids. We were fortunate. We were led to contact Emery Christensen and his wife, and they were trying to move out of a house they're in, and they'd bought another house. And he was an engineer from HP. They were buying a house much closer, and so we cut a deal with them, a contract sale with them to buy the house. We would pay them. We'd pay them a rental fee.
Lease with option.
Yeah, and we'd be there until we were able to finance the house, because we had to have some type of history with finance before they'd let us do that. So anyway, we got that house. We were there 10 years and went to the bishopric there, and Pat was relief society president there. And she'd been relief society president once before.
In Deer Park.
In Deer Park, Washington, where we lived for a couple of years. And so anyway,
Yeah.
Your turn. I've talked enough.
Well, most of our kids know the rest of the history.
That's right, our kids do, because they lived with it.
Yeah.
We love our kids. There's nothing we wouldn't do for them. We have, and we've endured many things, and we hope to be able to endure all things. If there's anything virtuous, lovely, or great report, we seek after those things. So,
We've had a lot of opportunities to serve in a lot of different callings.
yeah, Pat has served in her life 4 times as Relief Society president and once as the Stake Relief Society president. I've served in a couple of bishoprics and 3 times on the High Council, and
A lot of stake mission
a lot of
and
stake,
ward
a
mission.
lot of ward mission. 5 ward mission leader 5 times, and stake mission president 3 times.
Young men served a lot.
Young men, a lot of time as a young man in the young men's program.
One of our favorite callings was serving in the temple together as ordinance workers.
Yeah.
And we served for several years as shift coordinators.
In the Boise Temple.
In the Boise Temple.
Yep.
Another favorite thing of ours was serving as full-time proselyting missionaries for the Idaho Boise mission in a pilot program where the mission president took the young missionaries out of our area, and our direction was to find, teach, and baptize. During the 18 months, we were privileged to teach many people and baptize 30. So it was a great experience. Some of them we went to the temple with,
Yep.
saw them sealed as families.
Yep.
So that was a very special experience because Faris wasn't able to serve a full-time mission. And this was just like a young missionary mission, except He only had one companion, me.
I had the best companion ever.
And the other special thing, he even got to be a district leader for 2 transfers because the mission president said, Elder McMullin, would you please serve as district leader and teach these young men how to lead so I can call one of them to be the district leader? So he did, and it was a great experience.
Yep, it was. And I don't know if we need to put this, and we probably ought to put this into it. Should we put this about your illness?
If you want.
I think we ought to put this in there.
You've got about less than 9 minutes. So
We won't need 9 minutes. About 10 days ago, 10 days ago, well, last Wednesday
Probably
was
a
10
couple of
days
weeks.
ago. We found out that my wife's been diagnosed with renal cell carcinoma. She has kidney cancer, and it's metastasized, so they call it metastatic cancer
Disease.
disease. It's in her lungs, it's in her bones, it's in her renal, it's in her lymph nodes, and so we're dealing with that now. One more opportunity to do that. And we look at it that when she finally passes away, she'll graduate with her PhD in living. And when they get up there, I'm sure Heavenly Father will say to her, Pat, I've got a special job for you. I need a good stake relief study president here to teach all these other sisters how to be good relief study presidents. So she'll get that calling.
But we're very grateful for the sealing ordinances of the temple. And to know that we knelt across the altar and that our marriage has been sealed for all eternity. We've lived our life trying to live up to the covenants that we've made in the temple. And we have always put the Lord first. Our family and our church have always been everything to us.
Yep.
And nothing else has been more important than living the gospel of Jesus Christ and loving and raising our family. And so, to my posterity, I want to bear testimony that the church is true, that I believe in the plan of salvation. I love our Savior Jesus Christ. I know He is real and He atoned for us. And that because of Him, we can have the opportunity to live together forever with our families. I know the Book of Mormon is true, and I want our posterity to know that each and every one of you mean the world to us, as does the church. And I love your dad and your grandfather and your grandpa great with all my heart. And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. I want everyone to know how deeply I love my wife. She is everything to me in this world. And I'm so grateful to spend all these years with her. And we'll spend eternity with her. I'm grateful for the doctrine of Christ. I'm grateful for the plan of exaltation. I'm grateful for the testimony I have of the divinity of Jesus Christ, of His role as our Savior and Redeemer, of our Heavenly Father as truly the Father of us all. I bear testimony of these things, solemn witness that these things are so. In the sacred name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.